Hollywood was once called a perfect place of freedom and fairness, where bright lights made every dream come true. But behind that fancy face were secrets that made people scared. Some stars openly asked for stopping marriages between different races. Some actors happily joined clubs for white people only, then shamelessly used black culture to help their own careers. And some did not think twice about standing in front of hundreds of people to say that white people were born better. So in the end, who were the stars that hated and hurt black people? And did they ever get punished for spreading and using racism? 1. Cary Grant, the perfect gentleman who used movies to praise empire and hurt black coworkers. When people think of Cary Grant, they often remember the nice suit in North by Northwest or the charming smile that made him Hollywood's perfect gentleman. But behind that glow was a story few dared to talk about. Grant helped turn movies into a tool to praise taking over other countries, while again and again using race as a weapon to destroy the careers of those around him. In 1939, Cary Grant acted in Gunga Din, one of RKO's biggest movies, shot in the Arizona desert, but set in colonial India. On paper, it was a funny adventure movie. In reality, it was nothing less than ads for the British Empire. Grant's character and his friends were shown as good soldiers, while Indians appeared as wild, thoughtless followers of a mean cult. The Bombay Chronicle on March 4, 1939 clearly wrote, "This is Hollywood's way of calling Indians the trash of the world." In Kolkata, hundreds of students marched outside the Metro Cinema, throwing papers and yelling, "Don't let them insult us any longer." Yet in Los Angeles, the Times praised Grant as the heroic face of a new time. Shortly after, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association crowned him Most Popular Actor of 1939, as though nothing wrong had happened. Off-camera, the truth was even darker. Cary Grant was blamed multiple times of falsely saying black staff on set stole things. The most famous case happened in 1942 while filming Suspicion. Grant said his expensive watch had been stolen by a black crew member. Word spread quickly. The man was held by police, but the watch was later found in Grant's own dressing room. Still, the victim was fired and never worked in a major studio again. "He laughed like nothing happened, while I lost everything," the man sadly remembered in an Ebony magazine interview in 1967. Shockingly, this was not just once. Reporter Lester O'Neill noted at least 3 other black workers were blamed by Grant of stealing personal items like a silver lighter or a leather wallet. Some lost their jobs, others were taken to court, and one Jamaican worker even served 6 months in jail, all based on false claims. When the dust settled, Grant stayed safe in his fame, while his victims disappeared from Hollywood. Why did he do it? Many smart people argue Grant treated embarrassing black workers as backstage fun. It made his power stronger and gave him safety, knowing that Hollywood's system would always trust the word of a white star. The American public was used to seeing white actors on top, while black people stayed invisible. The result was terrible. South Asian actors were stuck in savage side roles. Black staff ruined by a star's careless blame. Meanwhile, Cary Grant received the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award and was remembered as Hollywood's forever gentleman.
2. Ingrid Bergman, the pure goddess who used brownface to erase real people of color. When we think of Ingrid Bergman, most remember her soft face in Casablanca, 1942, the woman who made the world believe that love could go beyond borders and hate. Yet behind that romantic light was a mean truth about how she treated issues of race. First, we must understand brownface, one of classic Hollywood's terrible practices. White actors darkened their skin with makeup, drew heavy eyeliner, and painted lips to copy people of color. It turned diversity into a cheap joke, sending the message that only white actors deserved main roles, while other cultures were allowed only as fake copies. In 1945, Warner Brothers began filming Saratoga Trunk in Burbank, California. Ingrid Bergman starred as Cleo Dane, while the role of Angelique, a Haitian maid, was given to Flora Robson, a white actress. To change Robson, the makeup team put on dark foundation, painted bright red lips, and faked a Haitian accent. The Hollywood Citizen News praised it as artistic creativity, but for Caribbean communities, it was an insult. Real black actors were denied chances, replaced by ugly copies. Worse still, according to the diary of Harold P. Kent, a lighting specialist whose notes are kept in the Margaret Herrick Library, Bergman once got very angry after finding out that the crew included a black makeup artist. In a closed-door meeting at Burbank, she supposedly said, "I cannot be comfortable with him touching my face. Replace him or I leave." 2 days later, the man was fired without explanation, replaced by a white coworker. His career ended right away. The irony is that only 3 years earlier, Bergman had shared the screen with Dooley Wilson in Casablanca. Wilson's character Sam was considered a rare step forward for black actors, a role with depth and dignity. But few knew that Wilson was paid less than even white extras. Bergman knew of the unfairness, but stayed quiet. And when given a chance, she accepted roles like Saratoga Trunk, where brownface was made normal as art. Audiences called her the goddess of freedom on screen. But the truth was, Ingrid Bergman protected her image by siding with a closed Hollywood, where whites ruled and people of color were shut out.
3. Humphrey Bogart, the heroic icon who lived a double life. Without freedom, art has no meaning. Those were Humphrey Bogart's words on CBS Radio in 1947 when he and Lauren Bacall joined the Committee for the First Amendment to protest HUAC hearings in Washington. At that time, the New York Times praised him as a real-life hero, a star brave enough to stand for justice. But behind that good image was a completely different face, one few knew. In the same year, The Hollywood Reporter published an anonymous opinion piece. Later, researchers argued the writing style and reasoning matched Bogart's. The piece made fun of the growing civil rights movement in the South, writing that the cheap, loud crowd do nothing but cause trouble, shaming the nation. Many believed this was aimed directly at Martin Luther King Jr., who had just led the successful Montgomery bus boycott. This was not just careless talk. In 1948, while filming Key Largo in Florida, Bogart was seen by a lighting assistant in a shocking moment. In his memoir, Behind the Silver Light, 1972, the man remembered a black assistant adjusting lights accidentally met Bogart's eyes. Bogart exploded, "What are you looking at?" and slapped him across the face in front of the crew. The man disappeared from the industry without a word of defense, as Warner Brothers quickly buried the story to protect box office sales. Bogart's two-facedness was clear. In Hollywood, he was celebrated as the voice of artistic freedom, but in black communities in New York, the Amsterdam News published columns suggesting Bogart only believed in selective freedom, freedom for white stars, while making fun of or ignoring black people fighting for equality. The chilling opposite. On screen, he was the righteous hero in Casablanca, and in public a defender of freedom. But in truth, he spread unfairness, embarrassing and punishing those who fought for their rights. 4. Fred Astaire, who walked out when a black artist won an award. Few would imagine that the king of dance, Fred Astaire, once caused a scandal that shook New York's art scene. On March 6, 1940, at the Astaire Hotel in Manhattan, the New York Film Critics Circle held its yearly awards. The hall was packed with stars and reporters. When the name Jester Hairston, a young black singer who had helped with the soundtrack of The Green Pastures, was announced as the winner for Best Film Score, the crowd burst into clapping. The Daily News praised it as a bold step for art beyond color. But in that historic moment, Fred Astaire suddenly stood up. Fixing his suit, face frozen, he quietly left the hall. A Variety reporter even caught him muttering, "This lowers the standards of art." His actions sent shockwaves. White press outlets ignored it, but black publications like the Pittsburgh Courier wrote angry editorials. On the night our artist was honored, Astaire turned it into shame. The two-facedness was clear. Just 4 years earlier, in 1936, Astaire had gained fame with the number Bojangles of Harlem in Swing Time. There, he appeared in blackface, face painted dark, outlined in white, white gloves, silk hat, copying legendary black tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson. Blackface, born in the 19th century, had white performers make fun of black people with exaggerated voices and movements, turning an entire community into a joke. By the 1930s, white audiences still called it entertainment, but for black communities it was clear shame, making cruel stereotypes stronger. The impact was terrible. As one Harlem jazz musician told Ebony magazine in 1965, "We created the music, the dance, but they wore fake masks, stole the stage, and claimed the glory as theirs." Meanwhile, Fred Astaire was forever praised as Hollywood's king of dance. The night he walked out of that award ceremony became a stain Hollywood tried to erase, for it showed how openly black achievement was hated.
5. Spencer Tracy, who called for banning marriages between different races to the public. Spencer Tracy was the perfect example of a serious dramatic actor. 2 Oscars, a face both rough and kind, a symbol of goodness. But in the summer of 1941, at a fancy MGM banquet at the Beverly Hills Hotel, he showed a side that stunned Hollywood. The tables were covered with white cloth, red wine freshly poured, with stars like Clark Gable, Katharine Hepburn, and Lionel Barrymore there. Suddenly, Tracy stood, tapped his glass, and spoke. His deep, gravelly voice was calm but firm. As later quoted in The Hollywood Reporter, "Hollywood must not glorify mixed marriages. They are the disgrace of American society." The room froze. Then a few scattered claps broke out from those who agreed. Only a year earlier, Tracy had starred in Northwest Passage, 1940, which praised Rogers Rangers, colonial soldiers who showed the Abenaki natives as savages to be killed. It was, in a sense, movie groundwork for his extreme words. When he condemned marriages between different races, the public already had the image that anyone non-white was unworthy. Why did he say it? Movie historian Dorothy Haskell later argued Tracy feared losing the white middle-class audience. He believed love stories between different races would drive them away, threatening his career. That fear of losing status pushed him to openly shame those who thought differently. Witnesses claim Tracy went further, hinting at real life. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz remembered Tracy said straight out that a white man marrying a black woman was lowering his bloodline. Then he sneered, saying the reverse was just as bad. Public reaction was split. Some conservative Southern papers praised Tracy as the man who dared to say what everyone thought. In Los Angeles, Daily Variety mentioned it briefly, while most outlets avoided the story to protect ticket sales. Among co-workers, whispers spread. Katharine Hepburn was said to have stormed out, muttering, "I can't sit here and listen any longer." But other actors stayed silent, choosing to side with power. The results lasted decades. Scripts with love between different races were dismissed before they could reach production. Talented actors of color could never hope to stand romantically beside a white star. Meanwhile, Spencer Tracy remained Hollywood's moral icon, winning more Oscars and being celebrated as a perfect example of integrity. Chillingly, the man praised as righteous on screen used that very reputation to lock the doors of love in real life. And when we turn to Barbara Stanwyck, we see another picture. A noir queen who not only kept segregation on screen, but walked straight into white-only clubs to defend racism openly.
6. Barbara Stanwyck joining a white-only club. In the summer of 1944, Life magazine published a vivid photo spread of a star-filled party at the Hollywood Athletic Club. The images of Barbara Stanwyck, the queen of film noir, beaming as she raised a champagne glass among top actors, quickly spread across the nation. The public of the time saw only a glamorous star basking in glory, but few noticed this important detail. The Hollywood Athletic Club was a white-only space, meaning membership was limited to white people only, clearly stated in the bylaws and strictly enforced. So what were white-only clubs? These were fancy places established in the early 20th century to preserve the purity of the white upper class. The founders of the Hollywood Athletic Club, white rich men and movie producers, wanted a place to relax, play sports, and do business without any presence of people of color, those of Mexican or Asian descent, or Jewish people. Members not only ate and danced there, but also discussed movie projects, assigned roles, and shared power. In effect, it became an invisible checkpoint that locked people of color out of opportunity. The image of Barbara Stanwyck, seated among members smiling under the flashbulbs, was the same as a statement. She not only participated, but proudly showed her presence in a space of open discrimination. Stanwyck didn't stop at attending parties. She was an excited member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, MPA, a conservative organization founded in 1944 right in Hollywood. On the surface, the MPA claimed to oppose communism and defend American values. But many movie historians like Thomas Doherty later pointed out that this was merely an artistic front to make legitimate the old order, including the keeping of racial segregation. The membership list included powerful names like Walt Disney, Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, and Barbara Stanwyck. Stanwyck stood out as one of its most prominent female faces. MPA events were often held in white-only spaces where people of color were completely excluded from the network. Journalist Joseph Breen once commented, "Stanwyck believed that preserving Hollywood's purity meant keeping power in white hands. By appearing in such photos, she made stronger an aristocratic image while expanding her political and artistic power network." Press reactions at the time were careful. Conservative capers like the Los Angeles Times ran photos of Stanwyck's parties with praise for the Queen of Hollywood. But within the black community, the California Eagle published a bitter editorial. "They raise glasses and laugh in the photos while we are locked out simply because of our skin color. Perhaps Hollywood wants to isolate us." Stanwyck got all the benefits, fame, roles, and the respect of the elite. But the cost fell completely on actors of color who lost chances to attend parties, to network, and to be remembered. Barbara Stanwyck became living proof of the opposite of classical Hollywood. On screen, she was strong and sharp, but off-screen, she chose to stand with the guardians of segregation. And this makes Burt Lancaster's story all the more bitter. He went from putting on fake brown skin to play an Apache to suddenly appearing at a civil rights march to read a statement.
7. Burt Lancaster, brownface, and then reading a civil rights declaration. Few would have imagined that Burt Lancaster, the muscular star, once praised as Hollywood's new hero, carried such a dark past. Before becoming a symbol of justice at a podium in Washington, he had once dined, toasted, and donated money to the very people history calls villains. In November 1948, the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles glittered with lights as it hosted a fundraiser by a far-right political group. To the public of the time, the tuxedos and dazzling stars made it look like a fancy social event. But records from the Los Angeles Times later showed that the group behind the party had close ties to the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, the extreme organization famous for white hoods, burning crosses, and brutal attacks on black communities. For decades, the KKK spread terror by beating, burning homes, and even lynching black people simply for demanding equal rights. And in honest photos taken by a freelance reporter, Burt Lancaster was not keeping his distance. He freely raised a glass, smiling among far-right figures, then signed a donation sheet. For the white middle-class audience of the time, these images caused little stir.
But for the black community, it was a shock. A top-tier star they had hoped might stand for justice was sharing a table with their oppressors. More ironically, just 6 years later, Lancaster put on dark makeup to portray an Apache in the film Apache, 1954. The production called it artistic creativity, but it was simply clear brownface. His skin was darkened, eyeliner applied, a wig placed, turning him into a fake version of a native person. Meanwhile, real native actors were pushed aside, given silent background roles. Lancaster took the spotlight while indigenous communities were again pushed out of Hollywood's frame. Then, in August 1963, America watched in amazement as Burt Lancaster stood at the Lincoln Memorial holding a statement and reading words of support for the civil rights movement during the March on Washington. The Washington Post the next day praised it as a historic turning point, framing Lancaster as a progressive symbol. His tall figure and strong voice became a lasting image for millions. But to many modern critics, the truth is far less beautiful. How can we forget that less than 2 decades earlier, he had raised a glass at a party with KKK ties, an organization famous for hunting and killing black people? How can we overlook him putting on brownface, taking a leading role that should have gone to a native actor? Lancaster became a living example of Hollywood's double face. In public, he could stand before tens of thousands and shout humanist ideals. Yet his past showed he had benefited from the very system of discrimination he pretended to oppose. To black and indigenous communities, Lancaster's statement in Washington was shiny hypocrisy, a cosmetic layer covering a stain that could never be erased. And that hypocrisy becomes even clearer when we look at Kirk Douglas, celebrated as the hero Spartacus, who once clearly demanded Hollywood impose a white quota, slamming the door on faces of other colors.
8. Kirk Douglas, the Spartacus hero, who proposed a white quota. American audiences aren't ready to see a non-white face carry the story. That sentence, recorded by a production supervisor in the memoir Hollywood Shadows, 1978, still makes people shiver today because the person who said it was none other than Kirk Douglas, the man the public praised as the screen's Spartacus, the liberator who challenged the old order. In February 1955, at a closed-door meeting at United Artists as The Indian Fighter was getting underway, Douglas, who had just risen to stardom, proposed an unwritten rule. He drummed his fingers on the table and told the executives, "We should ensure at least 90% of leading roles are white. It's the only way to protect box office." According to multiple witnesses, these words were treated as more of a command than a suggestion. Events played out accordingly. The role of Sioux leader Red Cloud, meant for a native actor, went to Edward France, a white man made up to pass as native. Real native actors, hoping Hollywood's doors would finally open, were once again sidelined, left to stand silently in the background. Why was Douglas so extreme? Movie scholars suggest he was haunted by fear of the box office. In the mid-1950s, America was still soaked in racist thinking. Douglas believed that if a person of color carried a heroic lead, white audiences would walk away, revenue would drop, and his career would tumble. So to protect his powerful leading man status, he was willing to sacrifice an entire generation of native and non-white artists. The bitter irony lies in the contrast. In 1960, Douglas championed freedom in Spartacus, publicly crediting Dalton Trumbo and helping break the blacklist, earning praise from the New York Times as a hero who stood up against oppression. But just 5 years earlier, he had personally put up a white quota, locking Hollywood into a discriminatory mold. The image of Spartacus freeing slaves on screen stands in sharp contrast to Kirk Douglas off-screen, the man who once laid down conditions that kept faces of other colors out. That contradiction is a vivid proof of Hollywood's boldness, loudly praising freedom in public while rigidly keeping white privilege behind the curtain. And that boldness becomes even more glaring when we turn to Claudette Colbert, the star who moved audiences to tears with cross-racial friendship in imitation of life, yet off-screen took the stage to condemn those fighting for equality.
8. Kirk Douglas, the Spartacus hero, who proposed a white quota. American audiences aren't ready to see a non-white face carry the story. That sentence, recorded by a production supervisor in the memoir Hollywood Shadows, 1978, still makes people shiver today because the person who said it was none other than Kirk Douglas, the man the public praised as the screen's Spartacus, the liberator who challenged the old order. In February 1955, at a closed-door meeting at United Artists as The Indian Fighter was getting underway, Douglas, who had just risen to stardom, proposed an unwritten rule. He drummed his fingers on the table and told the executives, "We should ensure at least 90% of leading roles are white. It's the only way to protect box office." According to multiple witnesses, these words were treated as more of a command than a suggestion. Events played out accordingly. The role of Sioux leader Red Cloud, meant for a native actor, went to Edward France, a white man made up to pass as native. Real native actors, hoping Hollywood's doors would finally open, were once again sidelined, left to stand silently in the background. Why was Douglas so extreme? Movie scholars suggest he was haunted by fear of the box office. In the mid-1950s, America was still soaked in racist thinking. Douglas believed that if a person of color carried a heroic lead, white audiences would walk away, revenue would drop, and his career would tumble. So to protect his powerful leading man status, he was willing to sacrifice an entire generation of native and non-white artists. The bitter irony lies in the contrast. In 1960, Douglas championed freedom in Spartacus, publicly crediting Dalton Trumbo and helping break the blacklist, earning praise from the New York Times as a hero who stood up against oppression. But just 5 years earlier, he had personally put up a white quota, locking Hollywood into a discriminatory mold. The image of Spartacus freeing slaves on screen stands in sharp contrast to Kirk Douglas off-screen, the man who once laid down conditions that kept faces of other colors out. That contradiction is a vivid proof of Hollywood's boldness, loudly praising freedom in public while rigidly keeping white privilege behind the curtain. And that boldness becomes even more glaring when we turn to Claudette Colbert, the star who moved audiences to tears with cross-racial friendship in imitation of life, yet off-screen took the stage to condemn those fighting for equality.
10. James Cagney preaching white supremacy. A declassified bundle from the Los Angeles Public Library archives in the late 1970s shook the film studies world. Included was the transcript of an April 1929 lecture at the Hollywood Athletic Club, where James Cagney, then merely a promising face, stood at a wooden podium and clearly stated, "White people are born superior. Hollywood must keep this purity or cinema will be destroyed by faces that do not belong to us." The transcript also listed stars present that day, including Clark Gable and Gary Cooper, who were said to have applauded. They may not have spoken publicly, but their presence and applause were enough to show that white supremacy once had a foothold right at the heart of Hollywood. Cagney, bolder than most, turned thought into speech, preaching like a priest before hundreds of elite white spectators. Cagney did not only talk. Before he became famous with The Public Enemy, 1931, he made a living performing minstrel in New York. Blackface makeup, darkened skin lips outlined in white, mock singing to entertain. These shows, condemned by the black community as disguised shame, became the springboard that caught producers' eyes. After he rose to fame, he continued to support white supremacy through roles. In film after film, Cagney often played white, righteous figures,
cops, politicians, or gangsters, while characters of color were put in roles as criminals, servants, or targets for violence. These choices were no accident. They made stronger the notion that white people were law and civilization, while people of color belonged at the bottom. The results were cruel. Black actors of the era, hopeful after the spread of jazz and blues, were buried under degrading stereotypes. The black community's Pittsburgh Courier wrote in 1933, "We create the art, yet Hollywood lets those in fake black masks take the glory." Meanwhile, James Cagney was showered with honors. In 1942, he won an Oscar for Yankee Doodle Dandy and was praised as Hollywood's gangster king. White critics saw him as a national figure, a symbol of American toughness. Not only audiences but politicians trusted him. Many conservative lawmakers viewed Cagney as the artistic voice aligned with traditional white values. But the marginalized did not stay silent. In Harlem, many jazz and theater artists openly criticized him. One African-descended musician lamented, "They turn us into a joke, then hand a golden trophy to the man in a fake black mask. Where is the justice?" Such words never reached the major papers but spread widely in the black community, proof of Hollywood's deceitful glow. Amazingly, for decades, Cagney's 1929 sermon was completely hidden by Hollywood. The press looked away, studios hid it, and audiences knew only the charismatic Cagney, never hearing how extreme he had once been. Only when those documents came back did people see clearly the golden light of classical Hollywood was built atop a foundation of taking away, oppression, and exclusion. For James Cagney, that curtain helped him rise to the throne and enjoy the title of legend. But it also left a permanent stain on American film history, proof that art once bowed its head to serve white supremacy. Looking back at the names we've mentioned, a harsh truth emerges. Hollywood didn't just create legends, it also nurtured extreme ideas that pushed countless people of color into the shadows. Icons once thought perfect, in fact, bore stains that cannot be erased. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Don't forget to leave a comment below. Which figure shocked you the most? And is there another name you want us to expose? Each of your shares is the motivation that keeps us digging up the truths Hollywood has hidden for decades.